Oh, hi there. It's not uncommon that we're asked how Dundas BI works, and this question usually isn't so much about training. Engineers sometimes just like to know what technologies are powering the software that they use. Essentially, what makes Dundas BI tick. Now, let's pull back the covers and take a look at what makes Dundas BI tick. And speaking of ticking, do you know why angry clocks only talk? It's because they're ticked off. I'm Jeff, and this is Off the Charts with Jeff. So the first thing you should know is that Dundas BI is huge. We recently did a count of the number of lines of code within the system, and it's around 25,250,000 as of version 10. Oh, and that's growing. Dundas BI is comprised of three major layers: the user layer, the application layer, and the data layer. And realistically, this can be simplified down to the front end and the back end. Now, the front end is where users interact with the application, and this is done exclusively through the browser. There's no plugins or anything that users need to install. Dundas BI basically utilizes JavaScript, HTML, and CSS to power all the screens that a user would interact with. All of the screens, including the dashboard and report designer, were actually created using public APIs via JavaScript or a REST interface. This is really good for you because if you have an interest in embedding or general customization and flexibility in the BI that you have, well, you want to make sure that you can do this yourself. And if you wanted to call specific commands being used on the front end of Dundas BI, you can certainly do it yourself with the public and open APIs. That's a lot of power. Now, I know that I'm talking a lot about programming technologies, but be aware that users working with Dundas BI mainly interact with the front end using drag and drop or selectable properties. It's a lot like what it feels like to work with PowerPoint. Developers using the system can, of course, go well beyond this by employing their own JavaScript or HTML to build their own features on the front end of the application. And if you're interested, the data visualization controls themselves offered in Dundas BI are controls that we built in-house using our 30 years of knowledge in data visualization. These are not pre-purchased, pre-embedded visualizations that many other BI vendors use. Now to the backend of Dundas BI. The backend, its heart, is essentially a C# ASP.NET MVC application. The Dundas BI backend application is hosted via IIS in Windows, Systemd in Linux, or in a container environment using Docker or Kubernetes. You have options. And if you want to just forget all of this and not have to worry about hosting, Dundas can host this for you as well in a managed version. Now, regardless of where the software lives, the Dundas BI application itself also requires a database to run alongside the application. And this database acts as a repository for the metadata that the application creates. This database can either be Microsoft SQL or PostgreSQL, and it doesn't need to be on the same box as Dundas BI either. Basically, content and settings are being stored in this database, and it's also used for warehousing, should you decide to warehouse your data. And by the way, if you are self-managing Dundas BI, from a maintenance point of view, all you need to do is make sure that you keep this database alive and backed up. The application itself doesn't generate any files, and none of that really matters. As long as you have the database, you can restore back to where you were. Another area of the application where a lot of people are curious is the data layer, which exists as part of the backend. Generally, we would use one of the out-of-the-box data connectors to make a connection to a data source. The data layer in general doesn't really rely on any particular plugins to function. Everything is built in-house. Now, one of the biggest examples of this is the in-memory data engine that we created. This system is something for which we hold a patent and was built from the ground up using the idea of a hypergraph to structure the data in a highly performant manner. Now, the last thing that you might want to be aware of is that Dundas BI in general has been built using a plugin architecture. There are plugin entry points all over the application for users who want to add additional functionality. You can write new data visualizations or general UI controls, new formulas, export types, security providers, tenant providers, data transformations, just to name a few. All the functionality that Dundas BI provides was used and provided to you via this plugin mechanism. So essentially, we wrote the plugins and we just give it to you. But if you wanted to write your own, you would do this using the same API that we do, which is great. Realistically, all the power is in your hands, and you can customize this application as much or as little as you want. So that's your tour of the Dundas BI architecture. It's a fantastic platform, and it really is as flexible as it gets with fantastic API support. If you'd like to learn a little bit more, I'd recommend taking a look at the video that we did entitled The Legendary APIs of Dundas BI. It's a great overview to show you just how much power you have when it comes to API support. That's all for now, and thanks for watching.